What's up, YouTube? Ryan Panny here. Hope you guys are doing reasonably well. It is time for a review of the new Lamb of God record, Lamb of God, out last Friday, June 19th. 5 years is a pretty long time in between records. Like, it is so remarkable, and I've spoken about this plenty of times before, how patient metal fans are, especially when compared with any other style of music. Like, think about hip-hop. In the post-Lil Wayne era, especially with that mixtape run he had, in hip-hop, just to stay relevant, just to stay in the conversation, you have to drop like 30 songs a year, like 2 projects, whether it's an EP or a playlist or a mixtape or an album, whatever, just to get people to keep talking about you. Otherwise, people are just like, I guess he fell off. We'll move on to the next, auto-tuned teenager. Meanwhile, in our corner of the universe, we just watched Tool fans wait 13 years for a studio album. 13 years. That's the difference between a 27-year-old man and a 40-year-old man. Metallica, 2 presidential election cycles. When what was it called again? Death Magnetic. When Death Magnetic came out, George W. was still president. And by the time Hardwired came out, Trump was president-elect. It says a lot about the loyalty and the passion of metalheads. Like, 5 years just went by for Lamb of God, and it wasn't really that big of a deal. For Lamb of God, though, I will say that something that was on their side during this extended absence that they've had is just how fucking awesome Sturm und Drang was, the last record. Like, for me as a fan, that was a career high for the band, at least in this second half of their career. And you can watch my in-depth discography ranking for Lamb of God to get more of the full picture about where I'm coming from. But there definitely was sort of an extended afterglow after that record. Now, of course, where that fuzzy feeling definitely wore off for a lot of us was when the band announced that they were parting ways with iconic drummer Chris Adler. He's one of a handful of drummers in metal where his absence is a really big deal. And those big shoes are being filled by Art Cruz, who used to play in Prong and Winds of Plague and a bunch of other bands. So that was a big bummer. And just a big surprise. It was kind of similar to the feeling when Joey Jordison left Slipknot. Like, what? Why? It just didn't make any sense. So there was that, and then there was also just the pre-release singles for this album, particularly Checkmate and New Colossal Hate. They made me a little nervous, I gotta say. On first impression, at least, they really felt like bare bones, skeletal Lamb of God. They didn't crackle like the Sturm und Drang singles did before that record came out. They didn't feel like any sort of step forward musically after 5 years. Just more like undercooked reruns. But again, rather than get entrenched in pre-album bias, this is something that I really work hard not to do. I just listened once or twice and then just sat back and waited. It's just so much more fun to go in a little bit colder when you have the full context around the songs. And now that I have all the context here, the very first thing that jumped out at me about this record that's very different from Sturm und Drang is actually the lyrical direction that frontman Randy Bly, yes, that's how you pronounce his name, took things in. Sturm und Drang, of course, came on the heels of Randy's very highly publicized stint for manslaughter after that fan fell off the stage. So there were songs on there like 512 and Still Echoes that were very, very personal to Randy. And then there were songs on there as well, like Embers, that was very personal to Mark Morton for a different reason. Sturm und Drang just in general had this introspective side to it that made it really stand apart from the rest of Lamb of God's releases. This self-titled record, on the other hand, is very bluntly political, like pretty much throughout the whole thing. This is Lamb of God's most politically charged record, if not ever, then at least since 2004's Ashes of the Wake, much of which dealt with US foreign policy at the time. And this is appropriate, I think, given that we're living in an even more politically divided time than we were in 2004. Remember, there were a lot of Democrats, like Joe Biden, who voted for the Iraq War. It was very much a bipartisan issue. If you look now at polling on major political issues, and everything is like 47 to 45, 49 to 46. It's just ugly. And I think it makes a lot of sense that a record like this would get made at a time like this in American history. And I gotta say, the political lyrics fit Randy's and Lamb of God's brand of rage like a glove. It's really interesting how both the personal stuff and the political stuff work equally well for this band. Like, one great example of political lyrics on here is the song Gears, which rails against public officials who are sort of bought and owned and don't actually do anything of consequence other than try and stay in power. There's a line on there, empty actions to fill the time, commercial gods keep you in line. I really like those lyrics. And the title itself, Gears, sort of conjures up this imagery of this big, lumbering political machine to which these senators and representatives, etc., are the gears that keep it turning and keep it just moving at this pace. Track Poison Dream deals with environmental pollution. There's the song Resurrection Man, which has some of my favorite lyrics on the album. It says, horror stories, talking heads, shilling for the thoroughbreds. Racial strife and rising debts segregate the living dead. There's a lot to unpack there, which I will let you do on your own time. Also the song On the Hook, which is the closer on the album, hands down the best song on the album, bar none. That one deals directly with the pharmaceutical industry and the harm it has brought on society. Randy calls those, or labels those involved, Hippocratic hypocrite. Very clever turn of phrase there. He doesn't always bat 1,000, like the song Checkmate, the single. That second blatantly anti-Trump verse is pretty well written and well composed, but then you have like the American scream. Like, dude, that's never gonna be a catchphrase. That is a horrible pun that should have stayed, you know, maybe on the B-sides. And then the song Bloodshot Eyes later in the track list, you get like this 5-finger death punch level bridge section lyrically. But overall, I find Randy's totally intelligible words to be pretty compelling and engaging. And vocally, he still sounds so great. Like, just wow. He's very much the centerpiece of this album, at least for me. He's got such a uniquely visceral but catchy delivery to the way he screams. And I do like that for a second album in a row now, he's brought back the clean vocals, which it's so ironic that Lamb of God were one of those holdouts, one of the very few bands in the new wave of American heavy metal who weren't like slowly sprinkling in the clean vocals. And then when they finally do it like 15 years later, it sounds really good. Like, it actually works well for them. So Randy Blythe is a monster on this album. Over the years, I certainly have grown to view him as a top-tier vocalist and songwriter within this genre, despite the fact that he's kind of a weirdo in interviews and he says shit like guitar solos are stupid, which, hey, if you come from the punk scene, they kind of are. I get his point. Unfortunately, though, apart from Randy, the rest of the band behind him, musically speaking, things are noticeably simplified this time around, and I do not mean that in a good way. The guitar riffs especially aren't nearly as labyrinth-like as they have been in past Lamb of God releases. Because remember, Lamb of God only really have one mood, which is angry, which is aggression. And what has kept the music interesting over the years is these kind of winding and unpredictable guitar solos that are happening around you, this two-guitar attack. But you listen to songs on here like New Colossal Hate and Reality Bath especially, they have these like extended chugging sections that feel very uncharacteristic of the Lamb of God's sound. Reality Bath especially, those verses, it just sounds like the band weren't trying as hard from a riff writing standpoint. Because writing riffs like that with that much stuff going on is a little bit more difficult. If you want to go dun 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 and just chug through a verse, you can do that. You can write that part of the song in, I don't know, 3 minutes. And you also have stuff being recycled here. Like in Reality Bath, you have those spoken word vocals and dissonant guitars being paired up, which sounds very similar to 512 off the last record. In Resurrection Man, you also have those pedal tone riffs being perched on top of the ringing minor second chords. So there are a bunch of musical examples of them repeating themselves. And look, recycling aside, which is kind of its own issue, if simplifying the playing on this record was a conscious choice for the band, okay. But the result of it is that their sound is much leaner, but also less mean. Not only do you have riffs that are significantly less exciting and have less twists and turns to them and are sort of derivative, but then you also have these breakdowns popping up in these songs that are jarringly generic for Lamb of God. Like, there's nothing in their catalog up to this point to really compare some of this stuff to. For instance, there's the breakdown at the end of On the Hook, which sends the record off. There's a breakdown in the opening track, Memento Mori, which is like like really sounds like something Adelaide Dying would have done on Shadows Are Security. Poison Dream, the worst example, where poor Jamie Jossa shows up to sing over maybe the dullest musical passage like ever in Lamb of God's history. So that part was weird to me. The riffs being a little bit simpler, the approach being a little bit more lean, I guess, for lack of a better term, that wasn't that weird to me. But when the breakdowns like that started showing up, that was the strongest indication to me that creatively, the clip was a bit empty for Mark Morden and for Willie Adler. The track Bloodshot Eyes especially is a fascinating case study because it is perhaps the most simplistic Lamb of God song ever made. You have that opening groove that sounds like a WWE theme, like almost Breaking Benjamin status. I really mean that. The verses get a little bit like moshy and you have Art Cruz abusing that China symbol in kind of a bro metal way. This song actually would have made an appropriate single because it sounds like it was made with a markedly different audience in mind. And Bloodshot Eyes really is the litmus test here for you. If this song, the simplicity of it didn't bug you, didn't sound un-Lamb of God to you, chances are you probably have a positive opinion of this record. If it did bug you, chances are that everything I've already mentioned already was irritating you by the time you got to this track. And that mention of a single actually brings me directly to my next point here, which is that Lamb of God have had weaker track lists in the past. Like with Sacrament, people don't seem to notice anymore that it has those throwaway filler songs at the end of the record, like More Time to Kill, for instance. But you know why no one notices that? No one really cares, and people still think of Sacrament as this great record? Because it had multiple big fucking singles. Bona fide smash singles. That is something that this record does not have at all. Where is the iconic live staple song on this record? Checkmate, is that the song? I think that the lack of a central single or two is what ultimately sinks this album. I really do believe that it could have stayed sort of relevant if it had one or two of those songs, but from where I'm sitting, I don't hear that anywhere on this record. And I could be wrong, it's still early. Like, I really love On the Hook. I think On the Hook should have been a single. Do I hear it having the live power of, even on records that Lamb of God fans don't really like on Resolution? The song Desolation, the song Ghost Walking, like those do have just an instant quality to them. I don't hear anything like that on this record. And one thing that contributes to that is that both of the band's great guest vocalists here are totally misused. Like Jamie Jost especially. I know I mentioned him earlier. The part that he's given in the song Poison Dream, it's like, if this was hip hop, that would be an 8-bar guest verse, and it would be over the beat break. I mean, they gave him like a couple little guitar chugs underneath. Not to mention, he sounds totally out of place coming directly off the heels of Randy's vocals. And what is so frustrating is that I hear him sounding good over a lot of the other material on this album. I mean, for God's sakes, him and Randy already did a song on his solo record like 10 years ago. So that is really frustrating. That could have gone a lot differently. And Chuck Billy from Testament, I do love that they brought him onto a track that's so blatantly thrash influenced. I think that's pretty cool. But his harsh vocals would have worked really well over this, as opposed to them just sort of relegating him to the background with that gruff, melodic, ritual-esque voice that he's doing. But hey, I do love Roots. It really is cool to hear the band break away from the monotony with such a nakedly thrash-influenced song. It's kind of a singular track in their catalog. And in terms of other songs on here, I enjoy Memento Mori, the opener, is a ripper. I very much like Randy starting this record off with clean vocals. I think that's cool. And Gears, like I mentioned, has great lyrics and some great classic Lamb of God riff writing in it. And On the Hook, of course, the closer to the album. Wow. This is one of my favorite Lamb of God songs across the last few records. There's a lot of things I love about it, from those quick little blast beats from Art Cruz, which add a lot of spice and a lot of character, to the dark, bendy chords in the chorus that are just so fucking sinister and really do adequately match this pretty morbid topic of mass amounts of people overdosing on drugs while the government allows it to happen. And the way the band just leap out of that emotional bridge section is incredible. That part just makes me want to break shit. And admittedly, for like the first time in the entire record. And I should say, I like the sound of this album. This sound really is part 2 of Sturm und Drang in terms of tones and production. The band really have not lost a step sonically here. Look, this album is better than Wrath. I don't care what your nostalgia tells you about that record. It is easier to listen through and more smoothly sequenced than Resolution was, although Resolution certainly has its shining, underrated moments on it. Sacrament does edge it out because Sacrament has the fucking hits on it. So number 6 out of 8 for Lamb of God records. Not the worst, but that is a textbook non-essential release. I could not think of a better description of this record than that. If you're new to Lamb of God, which I'm sure you're not, you gotta go with the first 3 records and then Sturm und Drang. Those 4 will give you a very solid grasp on this band. This record, you don't really need to bother with. But again, nothing on here makes me upset. Nothing's like bad. And I feel like anyone who reacts that way is sort of misguided. Maybe they're just overstating the mediocrity of it. If you don't mind things to be a little bit simpler and a little more unimaginative this time around, there's some good workout music in here. There's definitely that trademark Lamb of God anger. You know, Randy has a lot to say. Art Cruz is actually an adequate replacement for Chris Adler. Gives you some solid air drumming moments, which were my favorites. It's fine. This record is fine. It's not bad. But do I want to return to it? Not really. Maybe 1 or 2 tracks, but nothing on here gets me excited enough, especially for the length of time that I've been listening to Lamb of God. Nothing on here gets me excited enough to make me want to return to it. Lamb of God gets a 5 out of 10 from me. As always, thank you so much for watching, guys. If you enjoyed this video and are not yet subscribed to my channel, please consider doing so by clicking right over here, as well as checking out any of the other rock or metal related content that I publish here on a weekly basis. Really appreciate you guys watching, liking, disliking, just engaging in any fashion. Twitter, Instagram handle @RyanPannyMusic. Again, thank you so much for watching, guys, and I will see you soon.